This video will not likely make me a whole lot of friends, and my channel is already small enough as it is. But I feel like what I have to say on here needs to be said. But before we get into that, I'm going to do a bit of a disclaimer, which will hopefully save a lot of us a lot of undue stress and irritation. If you've been watching my review of this discography up to this point, you'll know that the last group of songs I liked by Guns N' Roses would be You Could Be Mine, and then a couple songs off Spaghetti Incident, and then Sympathy for the Devil. And knowing this, that should already kind of give you an idea on what I think of this album. I will try to approach this review as fairly as I can, but reviews are opinion based. Actually, reviews are only opinions, and this review will be mine. I understand people have differing opinions on this album. That's okay. Everybody is entitled to theirs. This is how I feel about the album. And also, before we get into it, I want to address a couple of comments that I could easily see be made. That way, this will also save people some typing. Fuck you if you don't like this album, or you suck if you don't like this album. Not exactly an argument defending this album, now is it there? So fuck you and you suck back. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, can we please stop acting like 5-year-olds? Also, a typical argument made for albums like this, or Generation Swine, or Risk, or Load Reload, Slang, Shadow Life, KFD, I believe that album was called, or Kill Fuck Die, I can't remember. I feel like I'm forgetting one of these lovely albums that in most cases people like to despise, but in this album's case people like for some reason. You'll always get the argument that, oh, you don't like it because it's different. And by the base idea behind that argument, absolutely not. I don't feel the way I do about this album on the strict basis that it's different. Now, there are a lot of different elements added into this album and a lot of different uses of elements from musical genres that I don't care for that are in this album. So if you want to use that as a basis, well, yes, that difference is something that I don't care for, but it's not based on the fact that it's not Appetite for Destruction. It's based specifically off of the decisions that Axl Rose decided to make with this album that I don't care for. Also, the validity of that argument is made pretty much non-existent by the fact that Use Your Illusion 1 and 2 are also very good albums, just like Appetite for Destruction, and yet those are very, very different albums from Appetite for Destruction. All good, yet different. So, it's not, my opinions on this album are not because it's different. So something I should have said probably 2 minutes ago into this video is that if you like this album and can't handle somebody not liking this album, hit the back button, do something else with your time, save yourself and me the headache of having to deal with you. It's okay. Now that that's out of the way, finally, about 4 minutes in, I can actually start talking about the album. Now, there were a lot of mistakes made with this album. The first being that Axl seemed so dead set on his vision for this album that he was unwilling to accept any other idea from any other band member. And I say all this using a lot of assumptions on my part, and I admit that, but I base some of this around comments that I've seen from band members throughout the years. My understanding was that, and I don't remember who said this, that the rest of the band just wanted to make a rock album. I don't know if it would be something in the vein of Appetite for Destruction or Spaghetti Incident or what, but I think a lot of the band members just wanted to make a rock album. And Axl had these grandiose plans of topping the Illusion albums with whatever nonsensical ideas he had. So already there was a rift between the band. And Axl, again, my opinion based on what I've heard, seems to have been the type to just not even really bother listening to the other band members. And I guess at this point I don't understand why they couldn't have done both. Make a good rock album all along while kind of slowly working on this master idea that Axl Rose did as something that maybe they could release later on in their career. You know, by 95 or 96, maybe put out another Appetite for Destruction type album, or hopefully something with some growth as well. And, you know, just kind of keep their name around and keep the band going. As long as they released a good album, people were going to like it. Guns N' Roses was that big. And the fact that their name still ends up in headlines and news stories, even today when something involving the band happens, really showcases that even after all this time, you know, they're still a huge, huge big deal. Huge big deal. That doesn't make a sense. Or maybe it does. I don't know. So, I mean, heck, this album took so long to be put out, anyways, that I feel like they could have done this in stages and had been constantly putting out some cool rock albums in the meantime. And then maybe everybody would have been happy. But that's getting into something that happened probably roughly 20 years ago. And it didn't go that way. So, what are you going to do? Let's move on. So, Axl's first mistake in this album was in not listening to his band members. That one, I guess, is more opinion based on my part because I wasn't there. I don't know what all happened. But the tensions in the band did lead to one after another members just up and leaving and just basically saying, fuck you, Axl, we're not going to deal with you. We're tired of your shit. We're done. So, Axl ends up running off all the talented musicians that he had to work with and is left to replace them with whoever the hell he could find. And I actually did read a quote from Axl Rose that said something to the effect of he recorded this album with just whoever he could find that was willing to record, or something to that effect. I don't remember. It was on a website called like Sleaze Rock or something like that, and wrote out some interview excerpts from a chat I think he did with some fans. This is probably like 2009, but I don't freaking remember. So there will be no link in the description for that. His second mistake was in his choice and replacements for these band members. A lot of these guys come across as not being nearly as talented as the guys that they were replacing. And a lot of them, most notably being Buckethead, who was not with the band when this album was finally released, who were not even of the same style that Guns N' Roses has done in the past. And yes, they had some changes in their style from album to album, but anytime you had a guitar solo, you had Slash on there, and he had his own distinct style, and I'm not saying they needed somebody to completely copy that, but you've got to replace a band with people that can at least put out music that sound like, okay, yeah, that sounds like where Guns N' Roses could go after Use Your Illusion 2. And he didn't do that. The next mistake Axl made was in not learning from his first mistake. There were all kinds of lineup changes throughout this album. As I mentioned, he had made the comment himself that he recorded this with whoever was willing to work on it with him, which suggests that he was enough of a pain in the ass to deal with that people just kept getting fed up with it and leaving. And if you look at the Wikipedia article on this album, it shows all kinds of musicians. I don't know, there are like at least 4 or 5 guitarists, maybe more, probably a couple bassists, probably 3 or 4 drummers. I don't have the article up off the top of my head, so I don't remember exactly. So what you end up getting with this album is Axl Rose, Dizzy Reed, and a bunch of hired musicians throughout the rest. They could have actually called this Axl Rose and the Hired Guns, and it would have made a lot of sense. And when you have an album like that, Jeff Tate's Frequency Unknown or Unlimited or whatever that stupid album is called, you tend to have an album that, if you don't have a consistent band, it's really hard to establish a consistent flow. Not to mention that bits and pieces of this album were recorded over a probably 15-year gap. And this album tends to feel thrown together, even more so. I kind of made a comment about Use Your Illusion 2 kind of seeming thrown together a little bit. I didn't mean necessarily the songs on the album so much as just there were bits and pieces. I was thinking of the final 2 tracks that seemed to just kind of be thrown on there for no good reason whatsoever than just to be on there. But this album really does feel pieced together on a computer. It feels like, hey, we have this guitar line from 1999. That's pretty cool. Buckethead did that solo. Let's go ahead and keep that. Let's add the drum beats from 2002 recording of the song. Let's go ahead and add the bass line from 2005. And hey, we'll use vocals from 1999 as well. And it really just leaves the album without any feel to it whatsoever. Well, I guess it does technically have a feel, but it's more of a computerized feel to it. There's no natural feeling to this album. It does not feel like a band coming together and working from track one through the end of the track. And something I really don't understand is, so Jeff Tate took a lot of heat for his album that he put out in 2013, and understandably so. I'm certainly not defending that album by any means. It was a bad album. But one of the criticisms that he got for that album was in bringing in a lot of hired musicians. But I think even on that album, I think at least he kept a lot of the core band members the same. I think it was just mostly guitarists coming in to add solos because maybe his guitarists really weren't good at soloing. I don't really know. That's another review for another time, which I'm probably not going to do because he's no longer attached to Queensrÿche, and so he doesn't matter. Okay. That being said, had this been an Axl Rose album instead of a Guns N' Roses album, again, I wouldn't care. But, again, another diatribe I could get on. I've already gone off on many, many tangents, and if you can't tell by now, I will probably go off on many other tangents. So this album already has a lack of a natural feel to it. It's something that was pieced together throughout the course of probably a 10 to 15 year time span, highly publicized. This thing had millions of dollars thrown at it for no good reason whatsoever. I have heard many good albums put together on much less of a budget. I think Full Devil Jacket's newest album, Valley of Bones, was put together. I don't know how much that album cost to make, but I know they did a Kickstarter to record it, and it was a fantastic freaking album. That could not have been a very expensive album to make, and it certainly didn't have the $13 million this stupid thing had put behind it, and it was way better of an album because you had a band coming together, writing songs together that mutually agreed on what they wanted to do. Oh, and they still actually have talent. Yeah, this is probably also going to turn into a bit of a rant. So, with all that in mind, what you really get on this album is another album much like some of the albums I mentioned earlier. Def Leppard Slang, Wasps KFD, Dawkins Shadow Life, Megadeth Risk, Metallica's Saint Anger, Load Reload, Motley Crue's Generation Swine, probably some Queensrÿche albums in there that I can't even remember the titles to off the top of my head. And unlike a lot of those other albums, this one's not seemingly as harshly criticized, and I don't get it. Which actually brings me back to a point I was going to make earlier. Jeff Tate received all sorts of criticism for that album he made, and yet Axl Rose doesn't seem to have really received much criticism for this, which I think he did a much worse job of having nothing but hired guns for this album than Jeff Tate did that. All right, now that we got that out of the way, getting back on track. This album is another one of those band with the kind of 80s style rock that kind of goes through the 90s and is like, oh crap, hard rock isn't popular anymore. We need to be more modern sounding in order for people to still like us. So let's do what the popular kids are doing these days, albums. And I guess a lot of people don't really see that, but it really is. Axl Rose decides on this album to implement a lot of sound effects and a lot of late 90s industrial sounds on here, and it really makes the album very dated sounding. I don't want to say Nine Inch Nails because it's really nothing like Nine Inch Nails. I'm not an industrial fan at all, but I'm semi-familiar with a little bit of Nine Inch Nails stuff, and it's not really like that at all, but there are a bunch of industrial sounds on here, and this kind of reflects back to something I mentioned earlier on in this video, that the decisions that Axl Rose made definitely make this a different release. But again, it's not because it's different that I don't like it. It's because of the choices that he made. I'm not an industrial fan at all. I don't feel like industrial music belongs mixed with hard rock, at least the way he did it. I actually did like the Wasp album, but this one I don't really care for adding industrial elements. At least not as heavy-handed as he does in a lot of these songs, and it really does not fit. Add to that the industrial sound a lot of the guitars have. Most notably, I think of the title track to this album. And it really just comes across as a desperate attempt at being industrial because in 1999, industrial was a popular thing to add into rock music. Smashing Pumpkins, Rob Zombie being a couple examples of bands that were doing this at the time. Also, this album tended to have way too many ballads for my taste. There were only, out of the 14 tracks, there were only like 5 songs that were reasonably able to be considered rockers, and the rest were ballads. And that's way too much for my taste. Again, that's a personal preference, but then this is an album review that I'm doing, which means it's my opinion, not yours. Also, add to that, this album just seems to be way too over-tweaked, and I feel like way too overproduced. There's way too much going on in a lot of these songs, and it sounds way too polished, and it's really something that they really could have done a lot less with, and it really would have come out to be a lot better. Shackler's Revenge being a good example of this, but I'll get into my track-by-track rating here in a second. Well, hell, let's just go on and get into this. Now, like a lot of GNR fans, I checked out the song Oh My God whenever that was released on a soundtrack, and when a lot of the live versions of songs started coming out in file sharing sites in the early 2000s, I checked them out too because I was curious what this album was going to sound like. And out of the 3 or 4 songs I heard, the only one that really stood out to me was the title track. This song I thought could be really awesome if put in studio and given a proper production. So at least with this song, there was at least one track that I was really looking forward to hearing how it would sound in studio. And then I checked out the album, and wow. So it begins with a bunch of weird sound effects and weird stuff going on, and I'm sitting here like, okay, what the hell is this? Okay, this is just an intro, I guess. All right, it'll be fine. Just let's wait. The song will start. It'll be okay. And then finally the main guitar riff hits. Okay, I thought. What's with the pause? Is this song ever gonna start? Oh my god, Axel, you just start the fucking song! So finally the song kicks in after a much too long intro. And it's basically like you would expect. The thing that really got me, except for the intro, was the industrial sounding guitars, which I don't really care for. But again, like I mentioned, this is what bands were doing in the late 90s, so it kind of makes sense that that's what Axl Rose was going for, because this song was probably recorded in the late 90s. Now, the song itself has a decent enough pacing to it. The first verse or so is pretty cool. It's got a guitar riff going on that's decent enough. And then it kind of changes for, I don't know if that's a build to a chorus or an extension of the verse or whatever the hell it is, but it ends up being drum and bass, maybe some weird guitar noises and just weird synth stuff that I don't really like as much. The vocals are still fine, the pacing is still fine. I would have liked to have at least had a guitar riff during that part. And then the chorus kicks in, and it's actually a decent enough melody for the chorus. I don't mind that, but the second verse is again the same thing, the drum and bass section. So all of that I would like to have had like a good guitar riff going over it. I heard a live version that's on their live album where they actually do put a little bit of guitaring in there, and it sounds a lot better. Of course, Axl Rose can't sing at that point, so it doesn't really work. But still, what are you gonna do? The song itself is overall okay. The solo is absolutely terrible. Do not like it at all, which is not surprising considering I won't really like too much of any of the solos on this album. I don't really care for the lyrics. I don't really care for Axl's opinion on China, but whatever. It's almost what I expected in the song after having heard a live version of it, and it's a decent enough opener. I definitely like it better than Since I Don't Have You. It it would not compete with most of the original Guns N' Roses catalog. In fact, I could probably list all the songs from the original Guns N' Roses catalog that it might be better than. But that number, really, you're looking at a couple songs here and there. So Fine, My World. It's really about it, unless you start counting the re-recorded stuff. Move to the City. Everything on Appetite for Destruction and Use Your Illusion 1 is better. But it's still a decent enough track. Well, You Ain't the First. It's probably better than that too. But just about everything else from the first 4 releases is better. It's probably better than a fair portion of Spaghetti Incident, but not the songs I like off of that one either. Shackler's Revenge is next, and this song had potential. It's got a decent enough pacing, kind of a little up-tempo. The vocals are decent enough. Axl's vocals in the chorus could be a little bit annoying, but with the right music behind it, it works okay. The problem is this song is littered with all kinds of industrial nonsense and weird sound effects and video game music that sounds like it's straight out of an old Nintendo system or Super Nintendo. It's just brutal musically. And what really, really irks me the most with this song is the annoying dance beat going on in the, I guess what you would call a pre-chorus, what's building up to the chorus of the song. Oh my god. It's like Axl Rose said, hey, you know what? Guns N' Roses, they need to be a techno band. Did not work at all. Could have been a decent song, but ruined. Next up, we have Better, and God, I'm going to do it. It's one of the better songs on this album. It's got a weird kind of industrial intro to it, but I don't know, it kind of actually works for this song. It's much more of a reduced amount of industrial stuff in it, so it's kind of okay. The verses have a decent enough guitar riff going through it, enough decent pacing. I actually really like the verses. I like the vocal melodies during this as well. There's a big change in the chorus, though. It took me a while to really let the chorus grow on me. It's still not my favorite part of the song. It's kind of Now I Know You Better, repeated over and over and over again in some various way, shape, or form, but I kind of think he was intending to shift the mood there, but I feel like the chorus could have been a little bit better, but still, it's one of the better songs on here. Not too bad. There's a solo in it that has kind of a bluesy little sound to it. That's kind of cool, I guess. Not particularly a great solo, but at least the sound of it's pretty cool anyways. At least the sound they use on the guitars. Overall, one of the few songs that I would listen to off of this. Street of Dreams, or The Blues, that was originally called, is next. And this one could have been okay. This one doesn't really sound all industrial or anything like that. It actually sounds like a ballad that I could hear Guns N' Roses do. It kind of sounds a little Use Your Illusion-esque. It's a lot of piano-based stuff with some drums and bass in there, and you have like a guitar solo, and I think there's some acoustic guitar in there too. It's all right. The chorus isn't really catchy, but it's good enough once you kind of get to know the song. But what really gets me in this song is Axl's voice in some of the verses. He starts like screeching and howling, and it does not fit the song. Axl, just, if you're doing a ballad, just sing it. You've done it before. Don't cry. Patience. The softer points in Civil War. You can sing a ballad. You're capable of that. But for whatever reason, he decides to go this route, and it does not fit the song. And a lot of times, it's kind of cringeworthy. I talked about this a little bit in yesterday's on Use Your Illusion 2, and some of my thoughts on that song and how his voice fit with that song, and it's much worse here. The music is not as good, and the voice is just more screechy and annoying. The song itself has potential, but it's just ruined by that. This review I know has been taking too long already, so I'm going to see if I can cruise through any more of this. The next three songs are If the World, There Was a Time, and Catcher in the Rye, and I don't like any of them. They're all soft, slow songs and quite boring. There is a section of If the World that reminds me of, I don't know, something that would be background music in a 70s porno flick or something. It's really kind of stupid. There was a time, I don't know, this one just drags on way, way, way too long, and I don't even remember Catcher in the Rye. I was going to listen to this album before I did this review, but fuck it. I'm not even bothering. I'm just looking at a review that I wrote a long, long time ago because I don't feel like subjecting myself to that. Scrapped is next, and I have actually heard this song within recent times. It's not too bad. I don't like the intro at all. More electronic nonsense, which you'll find in the previous three songs. Yeah, four ballads in a row I don't care for, but I've already touched on that. But Scrapped, it's all right. It's more of an up-tempo rocker type song. The melodies are all right. It's not one of the best songs in the world. It's not as good as the title track or better, but it's an okay song. I don't mind it. And then the next track after that, Rad, something or other, I don't even freaking know. Again, it's another kind of up-tempo song. This is another one that I actually heard a live version of years ago, back in the early 2000s before it came out. So I kind of knew it already. And it's, again, I don't really care for the intro to it either. But again, it's an alright song. Not great, but alright. Sorry is next. I used to actually kind of like this song. I think the chorus is actually pretty decent. But, oh my god, the verses drag on forever. This song is so slow, and it's approaching 6 minutes. And a song can be much longer than 6 minutes and be awesome. I've talked about several of them in this discography review. Coma, November Rain, Estranged, not Breakdown, but, well, Breakdown's over 7 minutes, so that one's a pretty long song too. Locomotive was the one I was trying to think of. You know, all awesome songs, all much longer tracks, but than this one, but god damn. I don't know. It's not the worst song in the world, but it's not particularly great either. Axl's arrogance shines through as he has a line about kicking somebody's ass. I don't really see that happening now, given that he's fat and out of shape and whatnot, but you know what, whatever, Axl. I don't even care anymore. IRS is next, and again, after the previous three songs, I haven't heard any of these other songs in years. Maybe that makes for bad reviewing. I don't really care. I'm not subjecting myself to them. IRS, Madagascar, This I Love, Prostitute, they all suck. I'm not even wasting my time. They're all ballads. They're not worth a damn. I don't care at this point. So, what we get is an album full of ballads and industrial music written by a man who chased away all the talented band members and just pieced it together with whatever people he could find at the time they was recording part of the song for. And overall, this album does not work. If this was an Axl Rose album, I could accept it. I wouldn't have even cared. I would have listened to it, actually. If this was an Axl Rose album, I would have still given it a listen. But, or even just another band that had Axl Rose as the lead vocalist. I would have still listened. But for this to be a Guns N' Roses album, this is just not acceptable at all. This is a terrible release. I don't care for this at all. There are 4 songs that I find remotely worth listening to, but none of them compare to anything that I would put in a Guns N' Roses mix or a Guns N' Roses best of or anything like that. It's just terrible, and there's not even a consistent band playing throughout this album. I know there are people that have different opinions. There are Axl Rose fanboys and fangirls who love this thing. I don't understand it personally, but more power to you. Good for you. At least somebody enjoys this thing. I don't particularly enjoy it. Oh, now comes time for the rating section of this. I'm going to give this a 25 out of 100. There were, like I said, there's a couple songs I kind of sort of thought were okay, but even they had their own flaws here and there. It's not a good album at all. I wouldn't recommend it. It's a terrible way for the Guns N' Roses name to go out if they don't record another album, and I really hope they don't because they don't really need to be doing any more albums. But who knows? Maybe he'll get an actual band together and do something better. Never know. Either way, this is a terrible album, and I really, really wish they had not released this.